Hello, everybody. Welcome to Health Pioneer Theater, where we once again preview some of our wonderful interviews of pioneers in the natural health movement, all kinds. And tonight we're going to revisit one of the outstanding pioneers as a alternative, or shall we say, natural medicine practitioner, and that is Dr. Jonathan Wright, MD. Now, we played pretty much a part one of his origins and his types of treatment and his journey through being trained as a conventional practitioner, and then discovering through hundreds of thousands of now collected documents, studies, and research, better ways to treat people that have less side effects. Simple as that. What's effective? What's less harm? Less potential harm? Today we're going to show where the rubber hit the road in that approach to medicine, and that is a section of interviews we did where Dr. Wright talks about his really confrontations with the U.S. FDA. And if you think you have it easy now, there's a reason for that, and there's a backstory to this. So why don't we start watching that program, and then we're going to comment about how this impacted consumers, producers, and practitioners of natural products and natural medicine.
I'm going to digress a minute away from maybe 3 minutes, away from bioidentical hormones to give another illustration of the same sort of thing that happened to Dr. Stevenson, who, even though she proved her case scientifically, was let go from the university for that very publication. She proved her case that bioidentical hormones were safe and effective. Now, of course, that was a number of years after they were first prescribed through the pharmacy in Vancouver, BC, in Washington State, but there was when there were still quite a number of women using them, so she could find enough ladies to participate in the experiment. All right. Well, another thing very similar to that happened to a Dr. Patil, P-A-T-I-L, who at the time was at a university in North Dakota. What he had done is worked first with experimental animals to prove that it might work, and then he had, with 2 men who were paraplegic, which, for the very few who don't know what that means, paralyzed from the neck down, and one of them had no sensation from the neck down, he gave them something totally natural that all of us have taken a bath in, because when we were inside a mom, the placenta was producing quantities of HCG, and of course, all of us as little gestating fetuses were exposed to a whole lot of HCG. So it's probably not, because it sure didn't hurt us when we were inside a mom. Okay, he gave them injections of this. Why did he do it? Because he had studied and learned that when the fetal nervous system starts to develop, the levels of HCG start to go up, and when the fetal nervous system is fully formed, the level of HCG goes back down again. So he said, hey, this stuff must have something to do with development of nerves and nerve pathways. So he gave very large injections of it to these 2 men, and within 3 months they were both up walking with crutches. Now, he got that published in a medical journal, but it's not at all conventional, so the editors of that medical journal took the next 2 pages writing that they did not believe this, even though they published it. And so Dr. Patil then sent them pictures of the same thing he'd done with experimental animals after cutting the spinal cord of the poor experimental animal in half. And a few months later, he does a biopsy, and there's new nerves growing right across the spinal cord. Anyway, he not only was criticized by the medical journal that published it, he was fired from his job at the University of North Dakota. And I was able to find him, fortunately, and ask him if he'd ever done that work again. And he said no. He had a new job at a different university, and he didn't want to lose his job again. It's very sad that we cannot make progress even with research proven, like this HCG and the guys are up and walking, research proven natural substances. It's very sad that we can't, because they're just not part of the so-called standard of care. And that goes on with bioidentical hormones. Like right now, FDA is trying to get rid of them. They're trying. I hope they don't succeed. And that happened to Dr. Patil. And someone actually paid for, I kid you not, a computer search of all the decisions of the Washington State Medical Board. And what they found was that only 5% of conventional standard of care doctors had been penalized within a year or two by the state medical board, but in that same length of time, it was 50% of the doctors who do natural medicine, 0% as compared to 5%. So if one wants to do this type of healthcare, one has to tiptoe quite cautiously because of that. Let me tell you about one of the very first genetic engineering disasters and how that led to some problems. That genetic engineering disaster was unfortunately, or fortunately, done in Japan by a company called Showa. And what they had done is genetically engineered, or re-engineered, I should say, some bacteria to make an amino acid in large quantities. That amino acid was called tryptophan. And the reason they wanted that done, it was a less expensive source of tryptophan. And tryptophan was in, even at that time, all the health food stores, because some people had found it helped them with depression, other people with anxiety and nervousness and something, and so on. And after the genetic engineering disaster, actually 82 people died. I think it was 82, but approximately 82 died of taking that Showa stuff, which was sent over to the United States, bottled as tryptophan. They took it and dropped dead. And the people who discovered what was the matter were at the Mayo Clinic. And what they discovered is instead of turning out one tryptophan molecule at a time, those little bacteria had turned out two of them stuck together, which is not at all the way bodies use tryptophan. And these bodies of these people could not use it stuck together, and it literally killed them. So FDA put out an edict that said, "Thou shalt not sell tryptophan." So okay, we took it off the shelf, put it away. But then the Mayo Clinic told us what the trouble was. "Would you please check our tryptophan and see if it is the genetically engineered kind?" And back came a letter from the Mayo Clinic. "No, yours is not the genetically engineered kind." All right, so it had been used for literally a couple, 3 decades with no problem, because it wasn't genetically engineered like that. Wrong. So we put it back on the shelf and sold it because people found it helped, particularly their mental health. All right, so one day when my wife and myself were both out of town, here comes a representative of the state medical board followed by an FDA agent, and they demanded all the tryptophan because they had told us we shouldn't sell it, even though apparently they didn't care. We had a letter of safety from the Mayo Clinic. Okay, so I wasn't there. My wife was CEO of the clinic. She wasn't there. What are the employees going to do? Here's these people. They handed them all the tryptophan. All right, but tryptophan was doing our patients a lot of good. And one of the reasons we're supposed to go to medical school is to do as much good as we can without doing harm. And it's never possible to do 100% of everything that way, but that's what we're supposed to do as much as we can. All right, so we asked the FDA for our tryptophan back. Nope, won't give it to you. Called an attorney, and we sued to get it back. That was in the fall of 1991. And we later learned, because FDA got some grand juries going to try to get after us later, we later learned that FDA had sent undercover agents to our clinic as phony patients to try to get us to do something that they could get us on. Well, apparently that didn't work. So what they then did is an armed raid. No kidding. Guns pointed. And they raided our clinic. And you know what? Our receptionist says she knows why they did that. She says, at that time, you couldn't get an appointment with either me or the other doctor in the clinic. There were only 2 of us at the time, for at least 3 to 6 weeks, depending. And she said, when those guys came in and stuck a gun in my face, I gave them an appointment right away. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, what they did was to charge us with mislabeling and misbranding, because one of the things we had in our IRB room was labeled capital B dash capital K-O-M-P-L-A-X, B complex, instead of capital B capital dash C-O-M-P-L-A-X, and that's mislabeling and misbranding. Why did we have it with a K? Because all of the B12 we could find in the United States at that time had either additives or preservatives or something else, and I still to this day work with a lot of environmentally sensitive people, and so we went looking for one that was pure B12, and we found it in Germany, and that's why they spelled it. But that didn't matter, and they found a moldy container of something else in our trash, and those were two of the crimes they charged us with, is using contaminated moldy stuff and using mislabeled, misbranded. By the way, it was in the trash because that's where it belonged. So they convened a grand jury, and very fortunately, as you mentioned, someone from Tacoma sent out a lot of messages about the raid, and Alex Schaus, who was in Tacoma at the time, he put together a legal defense fund. We got contributions from all over the country because we had to have one attorney for each of our 11 employees and co-workers. I had to have one. Everybody had to have an attorney. And they did this grand jury thing, and they couldn't get an indictment. So they convened another grand jury. Yeah. Oh, and they couldn't get an indictment there either. So they dropped the whole thing after 2 grand juries, and each of which went on for a year to a year and a half. And we never did get our tryptophan back because I don't know what happened to the lawsuit we filed, but it was overrun by this pointing of guns. And that's the FDA raid on Tahoma Clinic. Now, I suppose they could have another raid because I'm giving this interview, but I wonder what the grounds would be for that. But what it did do is create a lot of attention all around the United States. And partially because of that, when Congress passed, for once, a piece of good legislation called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, once they passed that, we were able to do more things than we could do before. So I guess it had one good outcome. Folks, FDA is trying to get rid of right now bioidentical hormones. Please go to anh-usa.org and just click on Save My Bioidentical Hormones. You'll get all the information. You can also send an email to your representatives about it. But they are safe. They're molecules which belong in human bodies. And as long as we do not use more than belongs in there, we're not going to do anything. And that's all about bioidentical hormones, which we are going to continue using for as long as we can, because so many women, and then fewer, but still men, say, when I replace my hormones in this way after my own organs are not making as many of those anymore, wow, do I feel better.
Isn't that cool?
Yes.
So, I mean, Dr. Wright's quite a character, but there's a little more to the story. So this is the 30th anniversary, or I should say it was in May, of the big FDI drug bust. Get those B vitamins. That's evidence. And 30 years, a lot has happened, and there are reasons for that. So we were looking around different periodicals, but I found an interesting book that summarized this, and it's available either on Google Books or on Amazon. And the book has a blow by blow discussion of this. Innocent Casualties: The FDA's War on Humanity. A little strident, but factual and documented. So in the book, under this incident, I wanted to read a little bit more about what happened as a result. In fact, you might say that if it hadn't happened, if the FDA hadn't done this for whatever reason, we may have much fewer health freedoms of choice available to us now. They could have just quietly pulled things off the market. But there's nothing quiet about this incident. So let me just read a little bit on this. This is under the section that she, the author, which I will remember here in a second. She calls this B Vitamin Bust, the FDA's armed raid of Dr. Jonathan Wright's alternative medicine clinic. And in part here, let me see where we'll start here. She says, nothing could have prepared Dr. Wright for the morning of the 6th of May, 1992, when 12 FBI agents in flak vests and 10 King County policemen, they're actually a sheriff's department, I'm pretty sure, knocked down the doors of his Tahoma clinic in an armed commando style raid. Bursting into the clinic from three directions, police officers and FDA agents pointed guns at the staff and ordered, "Get your hands up." Receptionist Marge Murphy recalls, quote, "They broke through the main door yelling, and one of them pointed a gun in my face. When another employee, Patty Hoops, attempted to call her attorney, a police officer ripped the telephone off the wall and threw Patty into a chair, injuring her elbow." I mean, this is almost theater, really. Then she continues, Dr. Wright arrived at the clinic a few minutes past 9 a.m. after the officers and agents had forced their way in. The FDA presented a search warrant, allowing him to make a phone call to his attorney. And then began their 14-hour search and seizure operation. The search warrant authorized agents to seize all drugs labeled in a foreign language, to confiscate all literature describing or promising the subject compounds, to seize all documents, and including patient records that related to dispensing vitamin products, as well as confiscation of all additional records, whether they be in the form of documentary records, magnetic discs, hard discs, or in any form. So what's interesting is the aftermath of this. Now, this happened in Tahoma Clinic, which is the native pronunciation of Tacoma, Washington. And a lot happened in 24 hours because of the local sensibilities and defensive preparations made by organizations like Citizens for Health. So here's what she continues saying. Refusing to take responsibility for what soon became known as B Vitamin Bust, the FDA asked a federal judge to seal portions of the affidavit and explained the reasons for the FDA's action. Patients of Dr. Wright and the local news media were furious. Several Seattle television stations aired a videotape taken by a patient which depicted FDA agents dressed in bulletproof vests bursting into the clinic and commanding employees to freeze. Local news stations showed angry patients picketing in front of Dr. Wright's office, which was closed. Editorials appeared in newspapers throughout the state, and I might add, the New York Times reported on this a month later. Quote, "If there is any plausible excuse for the Gestapo-like tactics used in a raid on a Kent alternative medicine clinic, it had better be forthcoming and fast," end quote, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer declared. Within 24 hours, now get this, within 24 hours of the raid, 2,000 letters were faxed to President Bush from irate citizens and people as far away as London and Brazil. Citizens for Health, a national lobbying group on issues of alternative and mainstream medicine, received numerous telephone calls and letters from worried Americans throughout the country. The required number of faxes to warrant the attention of the president is 20,000. Citizens for Health organized a fax-sending mission to the White House to make sure the White House received at least 20,000 faxes on the raid. Dr. Wright participated in a Seattle television talk show for 9 hours, and the switchboard lit up. Public interest in the case finally forced the judge to unseal the FDA affidavit, which had been sealed for 10 days. Now, there's more, but you can look it up and see for yourself. So the upshot of this is that it was basically like a hornet's nest that these FDA agents proposed. And I know I've read elsewhere, I don't have the reference, that the police, which were actually county sheriffs, were told this was a drug bust. This is one reason they were all okay with what they were doing. When they later found out, for all the publicity, that it was a vitamin bust, they voiced their criticism of the FDA for hiding that fact. So that's part of the reason it got so carried away. Anyway, as a result of this, the manufacturers and consumers realized they needed to get serious to protect their rights of choice. And they did. And this led to the Deshay Act of Congress 2 years after 1992. And as a result, there's very defined rules and regulations about supplements, what you can say, what you can't say, and their availability. And basically, innocent until proven guilty was the upshot of that. Now, Bonnie, of course, was in the front lines in the retail business at that point, and I just wondered if you had any comments on how you experienced that.
Yes, well, the prior March of that year, I was at the Expo West and I was in a room full of retailers, many who were crying and quite upset. This was before the raid because the FDA was going into little retail stores.
Oh, yeah, right.
And they were arresting store owners and their staff if they were to say something as simple as calcium helps bones.
Mm-hmm.
And so when this whole raid happened, and I'm telling you, it was a big room full of people that had been arrested or were in terror of being arrested. And so when this happened, I was working in a very large health food store in Southern California called the Whole Wheatery. It was Cheryl Hughes's store. And we were very, very cognizant of what we could and couldn't say. And we were just shocked that this happened to literally a medical doctor who, because he was not doing exactly what the medical society said, you have to treat a skin disease with a drug versus just something simple. I think it was vitamin D. He was working with someone. Oh my goodness. That was frightening to us to think we could be arrested too. So it shook the industry up. And it made us very aware that this could happen to us too. Sheriffs could come in and arrest us. We could be slammed around like those nurses were. It was a very dramatic time, but it helped awaken the general public to what was happening at that time.
Very interesting. Yes. So it was a real. I mean, you took it seriously, and now it's almost ludicrous to think of such a scenario. Because of these intrepid pioneers. And another pioneer that is often unnamed, going back to who did the 2000 faxes. Well, that was Craig Winters, who was the co-founder of Citizens for Health. And I wish that more writers describing that would give him the credit that he deserves, because it was very innovative. In fact, I've been told and I've read that not only was it immediate response, 24 hours, right? That he sent out a bunch to retailers and so forth to ask them and their customers to respond in 24 hours. And I believe they filled out a form and then they took it back to the retailers and they faxed it for them and so forth. It was signed by different people and so forth, something like that. But besides that, he initiated the response that was nationwide, not just all from Seattle or something weird like that. And he did a lot more other things like that. And we have, as an individual, he probably did some of the most effective and substantial activities in pursuing our health freedoms. And we owe him a debt of gratitude. One of these days, we're going to do an interview about him. He's now deceased, but he still deserves the credit that he from all that he did.
He was quite beloved by many for all that he did for the industry. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So that's our basic program for today. Think about it. So next time you buy that B complex spelled with a K, be grateful for Dr. Wright for making this an issue of legal record and showing an example of what we don't want to be in our health freedoms in the U.S. And if you go to Europe, by the way, right now, even in 2021, they have a lot more restrictions than we do as far as choices. And so you should always make informed choices. And part of the reason we have this program is to show you people who have made that easy to find information about risks and benefits and all of that when it comes to all therapies, is even alternative or natural therapies. So
And
thank
if
you
you
so
like
much.
this program, make sure to subscribe
Very
and
good.
sure to share with your friends. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah. Go to naturalhealthmovement.org.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, and we hope to see you soon next week.
See you next
See you
week.
next week.